Imagine you live in the countryside. Your house is full of books and plants. It smells of pine and fresh bread. There you are, packing up a basket for a lovely afternoon picnic. That feeling is at the core of cottagecore. It's all about taking that fantasy feeling of nostalgic, slow country living and bringing it into your home. This series is brought to us by Wayfair, the place where you can find everything home for every style, including the one that's uniquely you. The actual term cottagecore originated a few years ago on social media, and we're gonna loop back to that, but the history starts way before that. The concept of idealizing country living has been around for a super long time. If we go back as far as ancient Greece, the ancient Greeks had a take on cottagecore. In their mythology, they had a place called Arcadia that was a utopian paradise. It was a natural and peaceful place where nymphs and other creatures lived and was home to Pan, god of, among other things, shepherds. This pastoral paradise has been the subject of paintings and art for hundreds of years. Images of the perfect landscapes, flocks of sheep, shepherds, perfect gardens, people enjoying nature. It is all supremely cottagecore. And of course, they wouldn't have called it cottagecore, they would have used the term pastoral. But it is so interesting to see the connections between this and this and this. One of the most iconic examples of cottagecore in history was the HAMEAU de la REINE. The HAMEAU de la REINE, which in English translates to the Queen's Hamlet, was a cottage town built for and run by Marie Antoinette. This little paradise exhibits so much of what we love about cottagecore today. It was built to look like and emulate cottages. It had these beautiful gardens, but on the inside, it had the luxury of modern life. Importantly, Marie Antoinette's cottage also exemplifies the fantasy part of cottagecore. It was a way for her and her friends to live the romanticized version of country living. It wasn't what actual country people or farmers were doing. And as we move through history, there are so many books and stories that encourage that. The Hobbit, Little House on the Prairie, The Secret Garden, and Anne of Green Gables. Stories that let people escape into these happy cottage worlds. There are movies like Little Women, Far from the Madding Crowd, and Pride and Prejudice that bring those books to life and allow us to revel in the simplicity of that country living. Although a lot of the influence and even the name are inspired by the English cottage lifestyle, there's also definitely a Japanese influence. MORI, which means forest style, is a Japanese fashion and design style that is inspired by dwelling in a forest and had an online community as early as 2006. And no cottage mood board is complete without Studio Ghibli. Movies like The Secret World of Arrietty, My Neighbor Totoro, Kiki's Delivery Service. These movies exemplify the rich, pristine forest and cottages that we all wish we could escape to. So that basically brings us up to today. The actual term cottagecore was first used on Tumblr starting around 2018 to help tag this growing aesthetic that people were sharing of country-loving, picnic fantasy. In the last few years, we've seen a boom of love for this aesthetic as people share images and videos on Instagram and TikTok. The term has been used more and more as people share their cottagecore homes, fashion, excursions, and hobbies. All of that history brings us to now. And I want to know why people are loving it in this moment and how we can incorporate it into our homes. So I'm going to talk to the queen of cottagecore, Mona Jones, who literally wrote the book on cottagecore. Thank you so much, Mona, for chatting with me. I'm so excited to ask you all about cottagecore from the person who has said it all in your book. I'd love to just start by asking you, how did you first find cottagecore? I kind of know because I've read some parts of the book, but please let us know.
Amazing. Thanks so much for having me. So I've actually been doing cottagecore stuff for about 10 years, but for most of that time, it didn't have a name. And so I've been working as a photographer and an influencer on Instagram. And for the longest time, people were confused about my work and they were like, yeah, I see that you like the countryside and you like dressing up in old dresses and your house looks kind of old, but what exactly is that? And then suddenly in the pandemic, it all exploded and it was like, it all came together. And now cottagecore is quite a well-known word among the internet, I think. I had a bit of a rough time as a young person, and then as an adult, I was like, what parts of my young life can I take that were comforting to me and craft like this next chapter so that it's going to be really comforting, rewarding, gentle, and that was why I gravitated towards cottagecore. It's super cozy, it feels like a hug, it's a style that's very like welcoming.
Why do you think people are connecting so much with cottagecore like right now in this moment? Because obviously it has become much more prevalent and kind of iconic in the last few years.
Such a good question, and I've been thinking about this and I wondered whether it's something to do with like the availability of time, because what you have in cottagecore, I feel like a lot of retired people, it's quite normal to have those interests. They love going to gardens, they love spending time in nature, slowing down, baking things, knitting, and that's stuff that we love in cottagecore. And I feel like for those of us who weren't essential workers in the pandemic, we were sort of like forced to have that time that retired people have, and then we were trying to connect with these really meaningful ways of spending our time, or things that would comfort us through a stressful time. And I think it was both of those two things. I think it was the luxury of having the time and also seeking comfort in a time that was really scary and really stressful, and like going back to our roots a bit and being like, what makes us feel safe and what were we meant to do with our time when we're not working all the time and we're not completely distracted by trying to earn money.
I love that. That is so interesting. I love that answer. I can tell I'm talking to someone who's thought a lot about cottagecore, because I think that's a really well answered question. Do you personally have a favorite furniture piece in your house, or items that like for you in your house feel the most cottagecore?
Definitely. I couldn't decide on one, so I've got two.
Oh, wonderful.
And the first one is when we were moving house, we were quite desperate to fill the house with furniture and we didn't have a lot of money, so we were doing a lot of secondhand shopping, and we got this Victorian brass bed secondhand that someone was getting rid of, and it was only £40, and it's massive, beautiful, solid brass, like made to last forever. And then the second thing, when we moved, my granddad bought us this old pine wardrobe as a moving present, and it reminds me so much of the wardrobes that my parents had in the cottage I lived in when I was little, and every day I go and get my clothes out of the wardrobe and I just feel so comforted by it.
You see, and that, I think that's a huge part of cottagecore, and like you're saying, the nostalgia, the romanticism, it's having those memories attached to those items. You know, you didn't just say the bed looks really great, you're talking about how it reminds you of when you first moved in. And so you have those memories attached, which I think you're right is a huge part of that nostalgic, loving feeling of filling your home with items that really calm you and make you happy.
That's so true. You hit the nail on the head explaining that.
I'll keep that clip in then. Oh, Mona, thank you so much for chatting with me about cottagecore. I'm so excited to have gotten to talk with you, and I think everyone that watches this is going to be like, yeah, you're right, that is what I want.
Oh, that's so lovely. Thank you so much for inviting me. I've loved chatting to you.
I could not agree with Mona more. And so to bubble down everything I learned from my conversation with her and everything else I learned from my research, let's look at why I think cottagecore is so popular right now. It's a response to hustle culture and an aspiration for slow living. Life can feel like a grind, like a rush, and the way that we decorate our homes and make them feel comfortable can be an escape from that. Cottagecore is the ultimate escape because it feels so nostalgic and comforting. It emphasizes taking it slow, enjoying small moments, and doing things with care. It's a way to find a balance between the hecticness of life and the calmness you might want and desire. It's a rejection of the digital aesthetic. While smartphones and computers and technology all have their place in our modern lives and have so many conveniences and bonuses, it doesn't need to be the ruling aesthetic of your life. You can design in ways that do remind you of the past or romanticize the past. Thirdly, popular culture. Popular culture will always influence how we live. Taylor Swift's Folklore album created a calm, wistful world people escaped into. Cultural phenomenons like these, music and video games and TV shows, will influence what we want to have around us and what excites us and what we're into. Fourthly, design styles go in cycles. I think this is a really big one for cottagecore. You know, we've seen through the history how this is a style people have liked in the past. So it makes sense that that would come in waves, and we're in a moment where people are really excited about it once again. Okay, we know the history, we know how it happened, and we know why people are liking it now. So maybe you're intrigued. Maybe you're over there thinking, I'd like to give this cottagecore thing a go. Let's talk about what the common elements of the cottagecore interior design style actually are. Up first, introducing plant life. You can do that with fresh cut flowers, houseplants, or by planting a tiny herb garden in a window. But you could also bring in botanical prints into wallpaper, curtain, or other decorative items. Secondly, an emphasis on hobbies. By embracing that slower pace, cottagecore lifestyle encourages you to make time for the things that make you happy, and especially for old world skills, things like baking and embroidery, crafting and gardening. And that lifestyle influences the design style, so bringing those hobbies into your decor, proudly displaying your gardening tools or making a lovely shelf for your bread making supplies, those things can become a part of the aesthetic of your home. Up next, vintage inspired wooden furniture. Most of the furniture that you'll see in cottagecore homes are old or old inspired furniture, stuff that is made with real wood and will last for a long time. Stuff shouldn't look perfect. It should look worn and lived in and used. If you can imagine it falling off a pirate ship and washing up on a coast, it's cottagecore. And finally, natural colors and pastels. Leaning again into that nature influence, you want to use colors that you could find in a forest, browns and greens especially, but there's also this influence of pastel colors. So that's where the picnic vibes come in. You know, lovely pinks and yellows and blues. With those common elements in mind, let's look at a real world example to tie everything together. Let's talk about wallpaper. Wallpaper has come and gone in fashion throughout history, but it's something that is being really embraced by people that love cottagecore. Like we mentioned, cottagecore is an aesthetic. It's preoccupied with bringing a love of nature indoors. And so if you can't actually live outside surrounded by trees, the next best thing, the time-honored way to do that, is to paste trees all over your walls. Wallpaper has been used for hundreds of years. Historians believe that one of the reasons that wallpaper caught on was because it was a cheaper alternative to tapestries. Tapestries were a great way to insulate walls and be highly decorative, among other things, but they were incredibly expensive. Wallpaper was a great new alternative. Probably the most famous and popular designer of wallpaper was William Morris. William Morris lived from 1834 to 1896. He was British and was part of the arts and crafts movement, a movement that believed in creating things in a human-centric way. He was living in a time of great industrialization. His designs were a way to combat against that, to bring nature and beauty into homes and products. He's attributed for saying, "Have nothing in your house that you do not know to be useful or believe to be beautiful." It was that belief that had him making so many things for people to love and use in their homes. It's also a quotation that feels so cottagecore to me. Have something in your house that is either beautiful or useful. It's about creating that comfortable, cozy, gorgeous space that brings a smile to your face and makes you feel comforted, but is also useful, surrounded by the hobbies you love, the things you're learning how to do and make. I think that William Morris, both his designs and his philosophies, and wallpaper in general, encapsulate a lot of the reasons why cottagecore is thriving right now. It's beautiful, it's relaxing, peaceful, it's slow. It has that connection to nature, but it's also useful and functional. So there you have it. That's cottagecore. Go frolic in a field, throw a blanket in your backyard and read a book, finally finish that knitting project, or bake some bread. Cottagecore style has a long, rich history, and it's having a really exciting and beautiful moment right now, and maybe it's something you want to dive into. Head over to Wayfair to discover cottagecore style for yourself, as well as tons of other styles and pieces. And make sure to join me for the next episode of A Style is Born. I keep trying to be cottagecore, but the bugs won't leave me alone.